Welcome everyone to Eagle Dream's 20-minute tech break. The whole premise is we have 20 minutes, 4 questions. We're featuring 2 experts, and each episode features a different topic. And today we're going to be talking about data lakes. I'm excited to be joined by Maria Shivell. She's our senior project manager at Eagle Dream. She actually works on a lot of our data lake projects, so she has some great insight. And then also joined by Brianna Buttaccio. She's a cloud engineer on our Eagle Dream team. And she recently was nominated as Emerging Tech Woman of the Year for Tech Rochester. So she's in the running for that. So congratulations, Brianna. Before we get started, if this is your first tech break, here's how today's going to go. We're going to take the first 10 minutes to dive into data lakes. We have 4 questions that Brianna and Maria are going to go and answer. And then the last 10 minutes, we're going to have an interactive Q&A. So you're welcome to put questions in the chat box anytime throughout the session. During that Q&A, we'll also give you a chance to raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question. For folks that are just joining us on the phone, I'll also make sure to give you a time to speak up and ask your question during that time. All right, well, without further ado, I will give it over to Maria and Brianna, and take it away.
Thanks, Courtney, and thanks everybody for joining us, taking time from your lunch breaks, 20 minutes, and we hope to give you a good overview on data lakes. Just a little bit more background. I am a senior project manager at Eagle Dream. I've been here for 4 years. I actually started my career in information technology 20 years ago as a web developer, and we did database backend. At that time, it was Access and SQL Server. So I've always enjoyed working with databases, and data lakes is a good segue into what I've always enjoyed doing. Today, we are going to be focused mostly on AWS-centric services, although we've built data lakes in other cloud platforms. But our focus in our chat will be predominantly on AWS. I'll turn it over to Brianna to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I've been at Eagle Dream for about 4 years. I'm a cloud engineer with a background in development, and I'm AWS DevOps Professional Certified. And I've been involved with the majority of the data lake projects at Eagle Dream.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into the 4 questions. Let's see here. The 4 questions today that we're going to be reviewing are: what is a data lake used for? Is a data lake right for your company? Should you invest? What are some of the challenges of the data lake projects, and how do I get started? We'll start with the first question. What is a data lake used for? Bree, take it away.
Yeah, so a data lake is essentially just a large pool of unprocessed data. So a lot of people use the words data lake and data warehouse interchangeably, but the big difference is that a data warehouse is processed and organized and grouped for a specific use case. So to bring it back to a data lake would feed a data warehouse. And then there's different processes that are involved in creating and using a data lake. The first part is data ingestion. You want to get all of your data from your flat files to your databases all into S3. And then the next piece is data cataloging and searching. So there's a lot of built-in tools into AWS to scan and catalog the data so that you can query and use it as if it was a database. And then there's access and user interface, so it's managing who has access to what data. And then analytics and serving. So we use tools like Amazon Athena to query the data. We have AWS Glue to process and catalog the data. Then we use also tools like Redshift. Redshift's a database tool that's for data warehousing. It's meant for querying and reporting versus a typical like MySQL database, which is relationalized, and the Redshift is optimized for querying for reporting.
Bree, why don't you mention the benefits of S3 as a central storage repository?
Yeah, so we use Amazon S3, which is a flat file object storage. We use it because it's highly scalable, it's cost effective, and it's secure. So for scalable, you can have infinite storage in AWS S3, and then it's cost effective. So just as a quick price quote, the typical storage is $24 a month per terabyte. And then for archival cold storage, it's $4 a month per terabyte. And then as for security, it is HIPAA compliant. storing in AWS. So we do have multiple clients that have medical data in S3 for their data lakes.
Do you have some examples of projects that we've done that maybe our audience can relate to?
Yeah, so one example is a client that's using it for revenue and business metrics. So they're tracking things like service revenue, profit and loss reports, and units completed reports. We have another client that's using it to track pre-sales to post-sales. So they have tools like Salesforce integrated in with their revenue data joined to report all on that. And then we have another client who's using it to track medical history data. And they pull in prescription data from another tool, integrate it into the data lake so they can see their clients side by side with the prescriptions from all of their history all in one spot.
Great. Oh, I'm jumping to the end already. Thanks, Bree. We're done. No, let's go on to the next question. Is the data lake right for your company? Should you invest in this technology?
Yeah, so I want to cover some scenarios that businesses face and how a data lake can solve that for you. So one major thing that businesses use for quick reporting is Excel. It's quick, easy to use, easy to learn. But the issue is that Excel has a limit on the number of rows you can use, and it often times out when you get too much data. So with S3, it's infinitely scalable. You're not going to hit any limits with the amount of data you do. And the query time is tremendously reduced in the cloud. There are technologies specifically built for this querying. We can store files in Parquet format, which is faster for computers to read. And then we can also store it in tools like Redshift, which are meant for report type querying. Another issue would be aggregating data from different platforms to use all in one report. So like I mentioned specifically like Salesforce, pulling that data in to see side by side with your internal databases. So we can pull in data from systems like customer relational management, resource management, time tracking, sales and revenue data, and then business specific data, whether it's in databases like Oracle or SQL Server or CSV and JSON flat files.
Great.
And then another one is generating reports. So a lot of companies have reports they generate on maybe a quarterly, weekly, yearly, daily basis. And with the tools in AWS, we can generate those automatically. A lot of the processing tools also have built-in functionality to have automatic processes to run them on a cyclical basis. And then another thing is storing historical data. This can get very expensive, scaling storage, adding space to store for 7, 10, 15 years of data. When you're dealing with compliance, you often have to keep the data for 7+ years, and that can get very costly. And sometimes you don't even need to access the data, you just need it in case. So with S3, again, it's for the cold storage, it's $4 a month. So there's a lot of ways to save money.
Right, and you mentioned the compliance aspect. Can you talk a little bit more about how a data lake allows you to be compliant? You mentioned it's HIPAA compliant in S3. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so in the cloud, we have encryption at rest, which is when your files are being stored and they're not going anywhere, are they encrypted, which S3 has the built-in functionality for, and then encrypted in transit, which means when you're pulling the data, inserting the data, moving it from service to service isn't encrypted. And S3 allows encryption in transit, and when you're in the VPC, you have a virtual private cloud. You can, if you set it up and configure it correctly, you can have encryption in transit so it never leaves your internal cloud. And tools like Glue and QuickSight also enable encryption in transit as well from S3.
Thank you for expanding on that. I think that's an area where our audience might be really interested in and how to secure their data going forward. So why don't we jump into what are some of the challenges that we face when we're running data lake projects?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is identifying all of your current systems that you're using. So where's the data coming from? Who's using it? What are their niche use cases? And so it's important to spend time to investigate what you currently have just before you can begin knowing what you may want from a data lake or what your company would benefit from. And then it's also identifying the current business processes and daily operations. So this may be, how do people currently get access to data? You may be bottlenecked at an IT individual who is required to generate the SQL queries the reporters need and giving them access to that data set. And so by identifying these, we can mitigate them in the data lake. So for example, QuickSight is a reporting service and it's self-service. So there's a lot of built-in tools to create your own calculations and data sets based off of the data lake. So you don't need to have SQL knowledge. You don't need IT experience to be able to create your own data set and calculations and reports. And then also in the data lake, it's a huge paradigm shift for the whole company. So it's important to make sure that all the company's use cases are accounted for. And so it's a matter of just taking time and making sure that everybody from marketing to sales to the technicians to the people who are worried about sales and reporting, that everybody has their use cases accounted for. And the data lake is very much capable of getting the data ready and accessible for everybody. And the data lake is a point for data integrity and continuity. So by having one data lake, you know that the data is accurate and correct. And then when everybody has their own piece that they're breaking off, you know that they're starting from a good spot and not from their own query that may be outdated, or the data may have changed or the logic may have changed and what they're doing may have become outdated.
Right, and it's more real time in that sense as well. Some of the things that we do to help face some of these challenges is that we do discoveries where we document current and future state. We groom these stories that we develop with the users of the application and also the developers. We document requirements so that we can understand the sources of the data. As one of the challenges is really understanding the sources, but not only the sources, the logic, right, Bree? Yeah. I'm not sure you mentioned that as one of the challenges, really reverse engineering some of the logic that exists in legacy systems or databases. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so a data lake is a great opportunity to revisit your current logic. When companies are 10, 20 years old, they often have systems where they have layers and band-aids of patches to create solutions for new business needs. So you may end up with logic that's piled on top of each other and may not be accurate for your current business needs. So it's a great opportunity to dig through that, see if it's accurate, if it's still applicable, and clean that up and make it more efficient.
Great. One of the other items that we do is we like to train users of the data lake up front and onboard them to this new concept, because as Bree said, it's really a paradigm shift, a cultural shift in going from data warehouses or legacy systems or even SQL Server, which is not as cost effective as storing the data in S3. So we definitely do a training and onboarding of our clients to further understand their needs, but really to obtain a buy-in through the organization so that they understand that this is a pretty different concept in having all the data stored unstructured and structured in a flatter way, I would say. Would you agree to that, Bree?
Yeah, so we often have two different pieces of a data lake. The data lake is the first piece where you just dump all the data as is into S3, and that's having the integrity of the original data set. And then we often have a second copy of the data in S3 that's the cleaned and partially processed version. So all of your data may not be needed for reporting. So the second half of the data lake, the clean version, may have maybe less data in it. It may have cleaned up data, so removing characters that may break when you try to query and report against them, making sure that the CSV files are splitting properly, whether it's comma separated, quote separated, so kind of cleaning that up and making sure that everything's readable and processed in the correct way. And so we have two versions so that you don't want to lose any of your original data integrity from the first original source of data. And so in some ways it's processed a little bit in the second half, but the initial is unprocessed because you're taking whatever the original raw source was. You're not checking for anything that may break when you try to query it. You're copying it as is straight to S3 in a flat file.
Thanks for clarifying that. That's a very good distinction, that there is this sense of raw and then transformed data. And in the transformation is where that logic occurs and the calculations may occur. So thanks for that clarification.
Yeah.
So the last question is, how do we get started?
Yeah, so I think the first big piece is just an analysis and discovery. You want to look into your current systems, see what you're doing, see what the priorities are, and start documenting your current architecture and data flow. So that way you can identify what your needs are and what your priorities are. And optionally, you can identify some of the architecture you might want to migrate to AWS or the cloud, and you can save money on server licensing and data storage by doing that. And then, of course, you have to populate the data lake. So you'll want to migrate all of your current data to S3. We use DMS for that usually. It's Database Migration Service. And so you can connect it to a database, and every time new data is populated in the database, it automatically writes it to a flat file in S3. And then using the data lake. So this is completely based on your business needs. Everybody uses it completely differently, and some people just need it for the historical data and ad hoc querying. Other people want to clean and process it with a tool like Glue and then transform it for a specific reporting need to dump into a data warehouse. And then you can create reports from that. And other people want to use it as a source for their websites, and they may make it accessible through an API. But the important part is what makes this data lake valuable is that it's one source. You know everybody's getting the same data. You know that hasn't been messed with in any way, or it's not layered on top of layered. You have the original source. It's a standard for the whole company to grab it all from one place.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. This idea of self-service for our end users, being able to use a tool like Amazon QuickSight and just obtain the data and do calculations even with no programming knowledge on the fly in a tool like QuickSight. So I think that wraps up our overview of data lakes. We'll definitely talk to Courtney and have deeper discussions if we can get into more detailed tech breaks, but we'd like to open it up for questions.
Yeah, and if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll come to you. I know we already have one from Peter. Related to unprocessed data, how does this apply? If I have data in rows and columns, how is that stored in the lake? Or is it processed if it is in that format? Can you guys elaborate on that?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to what I said about having two pieces of the data lake. Your first is the unprocessed. And so if it's in rows and columns, it would translate into AWS as a flat file. So you can picture it as, it could be CSV. Usually we use Parquet because it's faster to process, but you would have a table go into the S3 as essentially a CSV file or a similar format. It's built in naturally to organize the data for you. So at the top level is the database. One level below that, it's separated by tables. And then one level below that is the contents of the tables. And we often separate that also by date so that you can easily query the data by that. And it's called a partition. And so that way you're able to exclude out and automatically cut out any data that's not in your date range.
Awesome. And I do have a question from Bruce. Bruce, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Yeah, well, I have been making some programs for ad hoc against data. And one of the issues that I ran into, and I was wondering if you have some suggestions, is we have data that's essentially, it's essentially write-only, but because of the way we are tracking the changes and I'm not able to use the transactional isolation to pull it from the SQL, I end up having to do a query against the data to get the latest one.
Yeah.
Even though data is normally has not changed, I still need to get just one row.
Yeah.
And I ran into a limit that even the and I had a case open with AWS saying, oh, you shouldn't be using row numbers for that much because in Presto it doesn't spill over. They're trying to move more functions over. But I ended up having to create an EMR process that runs quite a long time to go through and split it up. And I just wondering, is there another pattern to use for data that either can't be consistently separated in terms of, let's say, the time, and you have unique data, in which case it's easy to append, or some other technique for doing updates, because Parquet, as I understand it, is write only without doing a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to give an example of how we would handle it, and you can let me know if that answers your question. But for example, with things like DMS, there's a column that it adds onto the data. One for what was this? Was this an insert, an update, or a delete? And then another column with the date that it was inserted. So this has, I believe, 6 digits of precision for the second. And so that's allows us to know what the latest version of the data is. And so when I'm dealing with the data in Glue, which is the ETL processing, I grab the latest date for each unique ID for that table, and then I left join the data back onto each of those unique IDs with the latest date. So I know in that scenario, I'm using date data. Without having the date data, you can also try using the IDs if they're ordered. So you can compare the greatest ID if you know they're going to be in a certain order. Other than that, it's a very unique case-by-case basis, but those are the 2 easiest ways to grab the latest version.
So you're saying join back against the source so that I can omit the duplicates.
Yes. So
Right.
So my original, I create a query to get a unique one ID and then the latest date. And so there might have been 5 updates for this ID 1, but I want to get the latest date, the greatest date if it was yesterday for that. So now I have a table with just 1 row for each ID with the latest date, which is the latest version of that ID. And then I left join the data back on that, and I only get 1 row for each of the IDs.
All right, I'll have to look at that. Again, the issue I ran into was not that there was data changing, because we have a write-only data set. The issue was because EMR, I'm using, sorry, brain fart. The tool I'm using to pull is Spark.
Yeah.
And the Spark to SQL doesn't seem to support transactions. And I'm using, are you familiar with change data tracking in SQL?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and they have a whole write-up of if you can't use that, there's different techniques. And the bottom line is I have to be able to handle duplicates of the same row.
Yeah.
And since I don't want to add them in, I need to be able to do a row number and then just pick one of them.
Yeah.
So I actually don't even need to go back to the original, but I'll see if there's something I can do with that.
And Bruce, we'd be happy. Go ahead.
Thanks, Maria. I was going to say, I'd be happy to connect you, Bruce, with Brianna and Maria so you guys can dive deeper into this if you prefer. So I can definitely share, I'll connect you guys via email after the event.
Very good, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone else have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or you can include them in the chat box. Also at this time for our folks on the phone, if you'd like to unmute and ask any questions you have, feel free to do so.
We're also open to feedback on this session, and if you want to hear deeper dive into data lakes, what are you interested in learning more about for our next session?
Yeah, we were thinking about doing a part 2 for this. So any topics that you'd like us to expand on further would be great.
Awesome. I think that is all we have, and I know we're just approaching time. So thanks everyone for joining us for this week's Tech Break. Next week, we're going to be back with a different topic around data-driven marketing during COVID-19. So this will go a little bit deeper into data-driven digital marketing strategy. How can you pivot and shift your strategy with what's happening right now. So we're going to be joined by Cody Dalton and Mike Farney from the Eagle Dream team. Should be a great session, and we will send some info out on next week's session after the event. So thanks everyone for joining us. I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Enjoy.